Good morning. We're waiting for attendees to come in now to this launch of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre Annual Report 2020. We'll be with you shortly, just letting participants in. So we're continuing to let participants in, waiting for the launch of the 2020 Dublin Rape Crisis Centre Annual Report. You're very welcome. We'll be with you shortly. So everyone's very welcome. We're still letting participants in. People are joining virtually to this virtual launch of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre Annual Report 2020. So participants are still continuing to come in. We'll just take another little moment. Thank you for your patience. Hopefully you all have your cuppa if you're at home or in the office. Very welcome to this launch of the 2020 Dublin Rape Crisis Centre Annual Report. Okay, so I think we're good to go, according to my colleague here. My name is Noeline Blackwell, and we're going to start this by our chairperson, Anne-Marie Gill, is going to do the welcome. So I'm going to hand straight over to Anne-Marie Gill.
Thank you very much, Noeline, and thank you everybody else. I'd like to give a warm welcome to everybody who has joined the launch of the Annual Report 2020, but particularly to Minister Josepha Madigan for coming here today to do the launch for us. And I also welcome Lord Mayor Allison. In relation to Minister Madigan, I have to say that we couldn't have had a more appropriate person to open the launch, given her courage in publicly sharing in Dáil Éireann her own personal experience of sexual abuse, and it stirred the nation. And it also led to an outpouring of disclosures from other women and some men around the country, and affirmed for us that the number who report sexual violence and rape is only the tip of the iceberg. A year of living in an emergency pandemic teaches us a lot about one's own resilience. But during 2020, I was totally amazed at the extraordinary resilience of the CEO, the staff, and the volunteers of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and the 24-hour helpline, as they navigated unknown territories and continued to support those who sought help, advice, and counselling. In 2020, despite the pandemic, we undertook a major review of our structures and operational processes, which underpin the functioning of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and the 24-hour helpline. We did this to strengthen and to shape it, to better respond to the future challenges and to ensure that we have the capacity to meet current and future demands. We also want to ensure that we have a robust system and process in place to keep the 24-hour helpline operating efficiently, as the numbers continue to grow. And while the courts also suffered from COVID disruption, our work supporting survivors was as busy as ever in 2020. This is clear evidence of the need for a much more comprehensive support system in what can be complex and protracted journey for survivors through the justice system. The Department of Justice's O'Malley review, published in August, into how our justice system treats vulnerable complainants, reaffirmed our long-held view that sexual violence will continue to be a scourge and an epidemic in our society, unless our society addresses the insufficiently discussed topic of what constitutes consensual sexual behaviour. Rather than being a solution, we see the implementation of the O'Malley report as a significant step in recognising the special vulnerability of the victims and survivors of sexual violence. Much of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre work over the past year, and indeed before, is concerned with consent. We work a lot on the whole area of consent through our Body Right training programme for young people, through empowering the individuals who come for counselling, and through our advocacy services. And while a lot of excellent work has been done relative to consent in the education system across all levels, primary, secondary, and third level, we intend using our existing expertise and emerging research We are proposing to concentrate even more on delivering a sustained programme of work through broad national engagement with our society and trying to understand consent and its place in preventing sexual violence. We identified the fact that a lot of good data doesn't exist in relation to public attitudes to consent, and we have commissioned research which will be published in 2021. We are glad to see a similar government commitment to building society awareness in this much needed area. I would like to mention that in 2020, while many services were curtailed and adjusted during the pandemic, we did pilot a new innovative programme called Moving Forward from Sexual Violence. It's a structured, self-directed online programme with telephone counselling support and over 100 participants engaged. And given the high degree of satisfaction from participants on the programme, we are going to expand the programme. We are indeed expanding the programme in 2021. In 2020, we also began a conversation with the Citizens' Assembly on sexual, domestic and gender-based violence. And while COVID to some extent stalled this work, we look forward to continuing the engagement in 2021 and beyond. We're moving in the right direction. Society is slowly becoming more aware that non-consensual sexual activity, in plain terms, rape, sexual assault and abuse, should never happen. I want to thank everyone in the organisation who contributed to our work in 2020, from our amazing CEO, Noeline Blackwell, to her dedicated and talented team of staff and the fantastic volunteers. We couldn't have operated without you, and thank you so, so much. In a year that brought serious levels of stress, we acknowledge the proactive support that we received from our statutory sources, particularly TUSLA. Their immediate prioritisation of support for domestic and sexual services, backed up by crucial financial and management assistance, was an important demonstration of their commitment. It also was a demonstration of the long-standing partnership the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and 24-hour National Helpline have with TUSLA, and it has allowed us to grow our services and meet the needs of our clients more and more, both men and women. Together with the Department of Justice's O'Malley Reform Plan, the Garda Síochána's Operation Fuishiv, and commitments in the programme for government, all serve as markers of government's concern for the rights and welfare of victims and survivors. We also acknowledge that the support from government in addressing this epidemic of sexual violence through their support for the consent campaign, which is ongoing. We have reduced considerably other scourges in our society. We have reduced drink driving. We have encouraged people to wear seatbelts. We have made it mandatory for people to wear seatbelts. We have had a no smoking campaign that has effectively reduced the smoking in society. We need to do the same, and we can do the same for rape and sexual abuse. During the year, we were humbled by the response of the public benefactors of DRCC, and we want to thank them openly here. Support, both financial and voluntary, means a lot to us, and it has sustained us during 2020, literally. Finally, to our people, as I said earlier, to our brilliant CEO, Noeline, and to her expert and dedicated staff, and the crucial support and so generous and amazing volunteers, a huge thank you. For all that was expected of them in 2020, you delivered, and you gave even more. My fellow board members were unstintingly generous in their time and expertise throughout 2020, and we called on that expertise a lot, and I want to thank them all. To each and all of those who worked with us on projects, and to colleagues in other organisations who shared our aims and helped us in our work, thank you. But most of all, to those who experienced sexual violence and gave us the privilege of working with them to bring about healing for them and helping to create a better Irish society, thank you. I'd now like to hand over to Noeline, who will introduce Minister Madigan. Thank you again.
Thank you. That's Anne-Marie Gill, Chairperson of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. So it's now my great pleasure to welcome Minister Josepha Madigan to launch the 2020 Dublin Rape Crisis Centre annual report. Our Chairperson Anne-Marie Gill spoke to the courage and I just think the clarity with which Minister Madigan spoke in the Dáil before the summer recess about the experience, not just of her, but of colleagues and of a group of people of sexual violence that was taken for granted. That's part of the reason we have her here today, launching it. We're very delighted to have her. She is a reforming family lawyer over many years with great experience of the impact of sexual violence on relationships as well, and of what abuse looks like within those settings. She is also the Minister for State for Special Education. And I think in terms of what we want to say, Minister, we want to make sure that whatever we're doing in the future is properly inclusive, that nobody is left out of the conversation. So for all your official formal roles, for your personal campaigning over many years, and for all your expertise, we want to welcome you to this podium and thank you for coming to launch our annual report for us today.
Accordia, Lady Mayor, I would like firstly to acknowledge the incredible work done by the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and the important role that it plays in Irish society. And it's fitting to pay tribute to its CEO, Noeline Blackwell, whom I know well and who I've worked with before on a number of issues. And I want to thank her for her very kind words. And of course, Chairperson Anne-Marie Gill also for her kind words. I think the leadership of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, as well as all of its staff, its volunteers and supporters, have helped to ensure that during some of the most difficult few months for society, the vital work of the centre could continue, and this is fully deserving of praise. And today, I am here to launch the annual report. This is an important document which gives something of an overview of what the last year has been like for victims, survivors, and those who work to support them. We know that COVID-19 has meant difficult but necessary changes for all sections of society. And in our efforts to protect public health and keep the most vulnerable people in society safe from infection, we've had to face restrictions on our freedoms and way of life. And Irish society has endured a lot of hardship. And thankfully, finally, we are approaching better times. And we know that there are those across society who face dangers and suffering and who require support and protection, someone to talk to, someone to confide in, a place of refuge and an escape. This does not change just because there is a global pandemic ongoing. Sexual violence is a scourge in society. It is oppressive, abusive and inhumane. And over the last few months in particular, I can only imagine the trauma of victims who may have felt trapped either at home or in another setting, at a time when society felt closed and perhaps distant. And today's report gives us a sense of some of that trauma. And I commend the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre for its ongoing work throughout the pandemic, offering counselling and therapy services on a one-to-one basis over its national helpline and online. And with the ongoing support of government and state agencies, these services could be maintained during a particularly difficult time. And while I am here, I want to talk about how tackling the scourge of sexual violence is something in which everyone in society must play a part. This is especially the case when it comes to sexual violence against women, who are the majority of victims, though of course not the entirety, although I was struck by the statistics and the 83% of contacts to the helpline to the Rape Crisis Centre were in fact female. The sexual violence against women can be seen as the very worst element of a culture that does not view women as fully equal members of our society. And this is a culture that has been with us for centuries. And over recent decades, we have made huge strides to embed equality for all at the heart of our national life. However, there remains much to do, and it is a mission which requires the support of every community and every member of society. And speaking as a woman in what is still a very male-dominated world, the world of politics, I see on a daily basis how having more women at the discussion table can improve our policy making and national debates. And as I said recently in Dáil Éireann, many of the 36 women TDs and 18 senators may disagree in terms of ideology and policy, but on a completely personal and human level, we will all agree on one thing. We're all very much part of the unfinished democracy that is Ireland when it comes to the representation and treatment of women. A society that ensures women's voices can be heard at every level is one which will secure the values of respect and equality for all. Abuse, violence, and domination stem from cruelty, oppression, and hatred. And these are not the values of a decent society. And I know the vast majority of the people of Ireland are united in rejecting them. But security and freedom for all is best achieved through action rather than passive acceptance. At a national level, we are working on the third national strategy on domestic, sexual and gender-based violence, which will place a priority on prevention and reduction and hopefully include a national preventative strategy. We are resourcing our Gardaí to protect women, though of course there is more to do. And we are also working closely with and supporting organisations such as the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and its important advocacy work. On a day-to-day basis, we must always seek to call out injustice and equality where we see it. Shortly before the election of the current government, I remember stressing the importance of providing additional supports and options for those women and children who are facing into a torturous reality of being further trapped with offenders. And that was why I welcomed the non-application of the 5-kilometre travel limit to those who are escaping dangerous domestic scenarios, and also the recently extended partnership of Safe Ireland and Airbnb to provide temporary accommodation to the victims of domestic violence. And I've always wanted victims of these horrific crimes to know that they are a priority for government and that support is always available for them. And it's often the case that victims of sexual violence do not speak about their experiences. Many are afraid to report the crime or unsure if they will be supported or believed. These victims and survivors deserve every support that can be given. At the end of the day, it is up to each person how much of their own story they wish to tell. But it is vital to remember that we never truly know what the experiences the person beside us has undergone. Many victims carry their trauma quietly, a secret burden. And we can help with that burden, not by pontificating or pressuring them to do something for which they may not be ready, but by being kind, by showing openness, and ultimately by listening when the time comes. And it is also important that the values of respect and equality are imbued from a young age. And in my role, I visit schools across the country and meet with school staff at all levels. And I know that huge strides have been and are being made to place these values at the heart of the education system. And I also welcome moves at third level in particular to ensure that lessons on consent are a core part of the third level experience. At its heart, consent is about respect for the integrity and autonomy of the other person. And as a parent, these are the values that I want my children, my boys, to take forward with them in their lives. And I know other parents feel the same. So we must continue to be united and resolute in our fight against sexual violence in our Irish society and indeed around the world. And there must be no exceptions and no equivocation. Sexual violence is never acceptable, never justified, and never excusable. And I'm thinking especially of the women and girls in Afghanistan at this time and the horror and the fear that they are facing. Ní saoirse go saoirse na man. Respect, equality, kindness. These are the principles that the staff and the supporters of the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre demonstrate on a daily basis. The statistics that accompany today's report demonstrate the sheer scale and extent of the support offered to victims and survivors. It is a truly impressive and much valued support. To conclude, I just want to say that Irish society is fully indebted to the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre and other organisations like it. Your work is truly making a difference and shining a light. After a particularly difficult year for everyone, I want to pay tribute to all that you do and wish you all the best in the years to come. Gurv Mahagrav.
Agus gur míle maith as well. We do aim for that. We do aim for the respect and the equality and the kindness. So we thank you very much for that. And we do value the recognition within government of the need. We guess that maybe it isn't quite visible yet to the level we believe actually exists. The need is much greater, but we are making progress and we value that. And we particularly thank you for coming today, for taking time out of your very busy day and week in order to support us and our colleagues, all of whom work against domestic and sexual violence. So thank you very much for that. And in terms of the respect and the kindness, one of the first places that people will often approach us through is our national 24-hour helpline, 1-800 77 88 88. And so we're just going to get a brief snapshot from the manager of the national helpline, Michelle Grehan, of her work in 2020.
Thank you, Noeline. Good morning. I suppose I'll begin with there are so many things that I could have talked about today, given that the National Helpline is such a broad, complex service. But what I've chosen for mention are three aspects of the service that have become pronounced during the COVID-19 pandemic: isolation, lack of privacy, and fear of judgment. With isolation, the helpline, like everything else in the world, changed dramatically on Thursday, the 12th of March, 2020. Stay home, stay safe became the national message, and one that was necessary and reassuring for the majority of populations everywhere. But for the vast majority of our callers, these words became a source of huge distress and for some sheer terror. We listened to callers describing how all of their usual support seemed to vanish as they struggled to manage the effects of past or recent trauma. It soon became evident to our helpline teams that with the best will in the world, we were most definitely not all in this together. The impact of an enforced lockdown on those who carry trauma triggered overwhelming memories, feelings of powerlessness, stress, depression, loneliness, and worst of all, hopelessness, even for those who under normal circumstances had found ways to cope. Suddenly all of their coping mechanisms, distractions, and strategies of support and their services vanished overnight. With lack of privacy, after the initial shock of lockdown, we then became aware of a higher than usual level of callers reporting increasing levels of distress and suicidal ideation and thoughts. For those who lived alone, we were often the only people callers talked to during the day and night. The symptoms they experienced were magnified by an increased sense of isolation and fear of the unknown, and uncertainty about what might happen. The adjustment to this new reality was difficult for everyone, but especially for people who had experienced sexual violence. As helpline workers, we had to provide a higher level of emotional support to our callers in dealing with the isolation, and all our usual pathways of strategies could no longer apply in these calls. For those callers who lived within families, most of whom had been home for the periods of lockdown, a lack of privacy became a major barrier in their ability to seek support. Finding the time and private space to talk to a helpline became incredibly difficult for many. In some cases, callers were forced even to live in close contact with their abusers. We responded to these changes as best we could, and ultimately the DRCC was in a position to launch its web chat services in late 2020. This gave our helpline teams a huge source of comfort in knowing they could still support those who couldn't call via the helpline. For those forced to work remotely even, this was also an important avenue of support. In the interim, callers became creative in how they made contact with us, some calling from inside their cars, from outside spaces, including while they were going for walks within their 5-kilometre distance, And for those who were in a position to go to their physical workplaces, they often called us on their breaks, during travel time to and from work, and of course in the wee hours of the night. Helpline teams in the DRCC became accustomed during this time to hearing common themes from callers, stating that they were saying to us how comforting it was to have someone at the end of the phone, how reassuring the helpline continued its work for them, despite the pandemic, and in a lot of cases expressing concern even for us as helpline staff, and were we okay, which was very humbling. And the fear of judgment. Well, regrettably, we continue to hear experiences of recent rape cases and sexual assaults throughout the pandemic. In particular, younger callers expressed huge fears of being fined or shamed, and in some cases arrested for fear of breaking lockdown rules. We had to assure these callers that the Gardaí would only pursue the sexual offence and not breaches of the COVID regulations. And as well to assure them that our service was here to help and not judge them in any way whatsoever. In terms of patterns of calls, it became obvious over time that we were receiving a substantial number of calls for those who could no longer deal with the source of their trauma. These callers stated that in the absence of all these strategies, distractions and supports that they had relied on for years to keep the trauma at bay, the pandemic had brought to the service thoughts and feelings that they couldn't and they hadn't experienced for years. Statements such as, I've managed to do this for such a long time, but I've reached a point I can't get it out of my mind and I need to talk to someone about reporting. These were common statements we heard. We were able to guide these callers to our accompaniment services, thankfully, and in some cases to our therapy services, which was absolutely brilliant. And I suppose to end with, we are immensely proud of that fact. In the face of such major disruption to so many services, the National Helpline never stopped working and continues to offer the 24-hour support 365 days a year. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Michelle. You'll see there's a certain amount of weaving as we go to the same camera here all day, but thank you very much for that. In the same way that our helpline services never wavered, and huge respect to all who made that happen, our clinical services, despite having to change enormously the ways they operated, our therapy services also continued. And Angela McCarthy, who's our head of clinical services, is just going to give us a very brief indication of trends in the course of 2020. Angela.
Thank you, Noeline. So following on from Michelle's very interesting analysis and very true analysis of the themes that were coming through in the helpline, I guess these were the same themes that presented them when clients met with their therapists. So clients who come to the job, so I'm going to look at some of those trends and issues in DRCC's counselling and therapy services in 2020. And I'll also refer to 2 new services which were piloted in this period. Clients who come to the Dublin Rape Crisis Centre may have experienced rape or sexual assault in the recent past, some time ago, or as children, or both. The therapy model prior to 2020 was one whereby our team of professional therapists provided one-to-one and group therapy in our city centre offices and in outreach clinics around Dublin. Sessions usually last around an hour and are by appointment. The COVID-19 restrictions on face-to-face contact introduced in March 2020 meant a total review and restructuring of how therapy services could be provided. Limits on client movement and lack of access to clinics during periods of high restriction meant that the therapy model had to immediately pivot to provide remote support. The therapists had to adapt their skills at speed to ensure that engagement with existing clients could continue, and therapists and clients had to come to terms with a different way of communicating and engaging and healing. In practice, that meant initially phone calls in lieu of face-to-face sessions, and finally video links for those who wanted them. But indeed, as Michelle referred to, the lack of privacy that people experienced, often they were doing their sessions in their bedroom or maybe in their car or sometimes in a park, so they didn't always want video links. As the year progressed, some clients did come back to face-to-face therapy as we reopened, and we tried to, but the ongoing pandemic risks as assessed by clients as well as by the centre meant that for the most part, the support offered to the centre's clients was remote. So I'm just going to go through a little bit of the give you an overview of the therapy in 2020. So of 7,375 appointments offered to clients, 6,010 were delivered. This was an increase of 30% over 2019, when 4,619 appointments were delivered. The take-up rate for appointments was 81%, a staggering figure never before experienced. And I suppose it's one of the I suppose good things that came out of the pandemic. The clients really availed of the therapy services that were offered by their therapists. The number of appointments delivered to clients who had experienced a recent rape or sexual assault within the previous 6 months was 3,203 in 2020, compared with 2,523 in 2019. These constituted 53% of total appointments. The remaining 2,807 appointments was for the 47% of clients who had experienced rape, sexual assault, and past childhood abuse outside of that 6-month window. In 2020, we saw 570 clients in total, compared with 617 in 2019. Of these, 268 were first-time clients, while 302 were existing clients, a ratio of 47% new versus 53% existing clients. So I'm just going to give you some feedback that we received from our clients. We ask them for feedback and we anonymize it if they allow us, if they say that they're happy for us to publish it. So one client said, "It gave me skills to survive, it gave me reassurance and helped me to get to where I am today." Another said, "Excellent therapist and really understood me. We made great progress very quickly. I feel really positive about the future now." A third, "Thank you for everything. You made sense of everything in my head. The only way I can describe it is that I came to the therapist with 1,000 jigsaw pieces and she helped me put it together. I left feeling I could deal with some emotions or issues personally day by day because I understood where it was coming from and why. I understand now that therapy can help you heal, but it also gives you your power back." Crisis appointments for victim survivors of recent sexual violence tripled in July and August at a time when the lockdown restrictions reduced, and demand for assessment appointments for those who had suffered past rape or sexual in a more distant past rose by 30% in the same period. So you could see there were fluctuations. I want to just also refer to 2 services which were launched using the navigation theme, launched in 2020. And here I have to give great credit to our CEO, Noeline Blackwell. For about 20 years, the therapists had been looking for some kind of client support system that would help our clients with practical issues in their lives that were pulling them down, that they couldn't manage, and it wasn't really the therapist's role and they weren't able to do it either. So in 2020, DRCC piloted a new client support service. We appointed a client support officer, and this service assisted 40 of our clients to access entitlements, information and referrals across such areas as housing, social welfare, other mental health services, asylum and employment. This enabled them then to focus better on their own healing and contributed to an improvement in the quality of their lives. We also piloted, as mentioned by Anne-Marie Gill earlier, the Moving Forward programme from sexual violence. Again, I have to give credit to Noeline, who in a time when perhaps I would have been a little worried about online programmes, was very much supportive of this attempt. And it was launched in 2020 as well as a pilot project, and was very successful because it's a blended approach, including online learning by the participant and coach support provided at that time by therapists. So Moving Forward had 110 participants in 2020 and 300 information calls as well. And just to say, and the good news is that both of those piloted programs have continued on into 2021 and have become part of the service that's available to our clients. So in conclusion, I want to thank all of our therapists who really pulled out all the stops to counsel and support their clients who were distressed and traumatized during the lockdown period. They went the extra mile and more. So I just want to pay tribute to that devotion to their work. Thank you.
And thank you for that, Angela. That again, thanks to you for your leadership of that particular theme. And undoubtedly just highlighting in some ways, while it was tough work maybe in 2020 for us and other services like us. At the same time, there was satisfaction in knowing that we were able to support some others. And the third overview we're going to get is an overview from Shirley Scott, who's our policy manager, who's going to talk to us about the policy work that she has led and our accompaniment and advocacy work. So Shirley Scott, thank you.
So thank you, Noeline. So we have heard how, despite the impact of COVID-19, we still managed to support and empower victim survivors. So I'm going to pick up on that theme, and I'm going to talk about, the support and empowerment through our policy and advocacy work that we did in 2020. So TUSLA's announcement at the very beginning of the pandemic that sexual and domestic violence services would be supported as one of their 3 priority areas, I suppose that really reassured us that those that we work with would not be forgotten at this particular time. The Department of Justice's Still Here campaign, which Dublin Rape Crisis Centre were a partner organisation, they were able to get the word out that supports continued even at a time of greatest restriction. And then on Garda Síochána's operation Fuishiv, well, they stated that the travel restrictions did not apply if you were trying to escape the risk of harm. So I think what all of these approaches show is that the rights of victims and survivors of sexual violence was a significant concern to government and to relevant state agencies. So when we think about the beginning of 2020, that first half of 2020, we saw the emergence of a new Oireachtas and the publication of the programme for government. So I suppose we were glad to see that issues that are central and core to our work featured in that programme. In particular, there was a recognition of the need to build on the Istanbul Convention to tackle the epidemic of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. There was that need to legislate for online harassment and harm, and that there was a need there to further recognise the rights of victims of crime. And then in August, we had the Department of Justice's O'Malley review into how the Justice Department, I suppose, they treat vulnerable witnesses. So there are over 50 recommendations, and those recommendations for reform are now to be found in the implementation plan, excuse me, which is called Supporting a Victim's Journey. So we in Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, we have and we will continue to engage with the many different initiatives that are emerging from the department as they plan out that implementation. So I suppose during 2020, with the courts largely closed, our court accompaniment service was limited in what it could do. But that said, the number of people that looked to us, to the support services, to make statements to on Garda Síochána, it increased. So here we were supporting many more victims of sexual offences than we ever had before. And we definitely think that this is a trend that is going to continue. Thanks to the support of the Department of Justice, 2021 will see an expansion to our justice accompaniment service. And that will ensure that every victim survivor of a sexual offence who engages with our services here in Dublin Rape Crisis Centre will be supported in whatever way is needed. So that might be to the sexual assault treatment unit for a forensic exam. It might be making a statement or attending court. Now, I suppose during the pandemic, we would have clearly seen how platforms and technologies would have had a very positive impact for us all. But we here in Dublin Rape Crisis Centre, we are going to continue to work to highlight and to limit the reality of harmful abuse online. Now, we did very warmly welcome the enactment towards the end of 2020 of the Harassment, Harmful Communications and Related Offences Act. And we also welcomed the publication of the general scheme of the Online Safety and Media Regulation Bill, which will bring the establishment of a Digital Safety Commissioner very much into focus in the coming year. So I suppose as we look towards 2021, we will continue here in Dublin Rape Crisis Centre to work on our own, but we will also collaborate with our colleagues in networks and in other organisations. Why? Because we want to amplify the voice of the victim survivor, as well as bringing the benefit of our expertise and our experience to those who are creating and implementing policies that affect the lives of those who have been affected by sexual violence.
Thank you, Shirley. I'm just going to pick up briefly on some of the matters that were mentioned by all three of my colleagues, and maybe going straight on from what Shirley was saying there, just and Yvonne, if you wouldn't mind keeping me straight, no more than 5 minutes, shut me up. So just those who are looking at our annual report will see that we structure our work under 3 pillars. One is the support for those who have been harmed by sexual violence and helping them to heal. The second is the pillar of seeking to eliminate the tolerance of sexual violence in our society, principally in 2 ways: by holding those who carry out such abuse and violence, by holding them to account, and then by raising understanding of what an equal, healthy society would look like, which was free or much freer of the sexual violence that is so endemic in our society right now. And the third is having a strong, sustainable organisation. And ideally, I would be able to just mop up something in relation to each of those separately. But the truth is, all of them feed into each other. Much of what we know comes from what we know and what we hear from those who've experienced sexual violence and who've survived it. And we recognise their expertise by experience, and we respect that, as well as having our own expertise in-house across the areas of law, therapy, education, and the other areas that are so important if we're going to change. So if we are talking about navigating 2020, we are talking about what did we actually learn out of it? And I think what we learned was flexibility. We learned that there are new ways of doing things. We learned that much of the core of what we did was correct, that we were correct in thinking that what people need is they need to have confidential, non-judgmental support in understanding the harm that has been done to them and empowering them to heal. We understand that people need training, for instance, in how to deal with a disclosure to them of sexual violence, in how to formulate a policy around sexual harassment, as we have helped with in colleges through the year, that actually bolsters and produces a culture of zero tolerance of sexual harassment. We've learned that we can work with the Department of Justice in terms of reforming the court system. So for instance, in our therapy work into the future, I think we would be agreed that while we are delighted to be coming back face to face to meet people who need us, there will always be those now who will say, do you know what, I prefer to stay on the phone, or I prefer to stay on video to you, prefer to do your online course. All of those things will be possible into the future, and we will be able, we hope, to support more people like that. In terms of the helpline, as Michelle mentioned, getting the web chat was great, but it is true to say in terms of a strong organisation, we would neither have had the capacity to take the helpline fully remote, as we had to do for a while, and then partly remote, or to build the web chat without the investment we had been able to put into it, thanks to the funding that was done by so many people on our behalf in fabulous fundraisers that people just struck up on their own, as well as worked on by our own fundraising team and by the state support. So that investment needs to continue, because we're now aiming to increase to include a translation service, which will allow people to speak more easily in a language in which they're comfortable. In terms of those who are now seeking help, yeah, we say, please look for the help you need. You are entitled to it. You are never responsible for your own abuse. You are entitled to the help. We are not going to be able to do all this on our own. It is a problem which was always there, but which was not recognized by the state as the primary responsibility until recently. And now we will improve our own systems as best we can, but we will have to depend on the state under the next national strategy that the Minister mentioned to have a recognition of the much bigger problem than we knew about. Similarly, with accompaniment into the court systems. In terms of our education and training, we believe this is crucial, that we actually have capacity to use our expertise to help people to understand how to deal with disclosures, how to understand the trauma that's caused by rape. We are particularly looking forward to being able to work with professionals who deal with those who've experienced sexual violence, so that they understand not only the impact of trauma on, for instance, memory, on understanding, on ways of coping, but also that they understand the myths that we all grow up with in this society. And in that regard, our aim will certainly be to have a much more sustained program of work around ensuring a better understanding in our wider society of what consensual activity looks like. As our chairperson Anne-Marie Gill said, non-consensual sexual activity in plain language is rape and sexual abuse. This is the reality. It doesn't have to be like that in so many ways. We also want to work with all the others with whom we collaborate anyway, and with the new groups that we've come into contact with recently, like Comedy Safety Standards and others, where we're supporting them in their work in the gig economy in Ireland. We have our role as an NGO. We are a non-governmental organisation. We will work with others. We will particularly respect and work with survivors of sexual violence who have so much to teach us in a country where they were not heard until quite recently. But we will also say that primarily to implement all of the requirements of the state under the Istanbul Convention to eliminate sexual violence and domestic violence, particularly against women and girls, but in general, that requires the state to play its part as well. And we will do what we can. Finally, I want to say thank you. Again, I want to repeat what Anne-Marie Gill, our chairperson, said in terms of thanks to all of the staff and the volunteers of this organisation who were so amazingly flexible and committed the whole way through 2020 to making sure our services survived. Our volunteers in particular went above and beyond the call of duty. Also, we've had consultants in from time to time, and they have been amazing as well in the amount of work that they've given us. And we are really thankful for the collaboration we have with our colleagues. I want to thank those who put this report together. Big thanks to our communications and campaigns manager, Yvonne Woods, who led the team here in the office, to Abby and the team at Language, who produced a terribly nice annual report, which will be up on the website straight after this, I think, so that anyone can see, and our statistics, to Shirley, and Shirley in particular, Shirley Scott, who worked so hard to put the figures and the statistics together, and worked so hard with Angela and Michelle in relation to that, to Sheena Frost, our statistician, who checked that the figures were accurate, to Tom Duke, who is running this webinar. And I want to say a huge thank you to our Youth Advisory Council, which just really came into its own this year. And you will be hearing a little bit immediately after me from Grainne Henry, one of that Youth Advisory Council. And she's kind of typical of some of the volunteers we've had, people who have one name within the organisation, but who has done so much to support us in so many ways over time. So at this stage, and for the closing part of this seminar, we are handing over to Grainne to do a brief introduction to a video that will talk about consent, a consent video, because it is the Youth Advisory Council's production and their way of talking about consent, and it's also our commitment to another stage of our development. So here we hand over to Grainne's introduction.
Hi, my name is Grainne Henry and I'm a member of the Youth Advisory Panel here at Dublin Rape Crisis Centre. Over the past year and a half, we've been working on developing messaging for young people around healthy relationships and the prevention of sexual violence. As part of this, we helped produce an animation discussing healthy communication and the steps to consent. A lot of young people struggle to think about how to bring up consent when they meet new people. We feel that making consent a part of normal, everyday conversation is the answer to this, and the animation you're going to watch really outlines this. You can find the Stepping Stones to Consent video and other resources on our website and social media. Please feel free to share and get the conversation going and help make consent a part of normal, everyday conversation. Thank you and enjoy.
Consent is all about respect.
Checking in with yourself and knowing how you're feeling.
Talking with the person you're with.
Being aware of how they're feeling and what they want.
Saying what you need and how you feel.
And staying aware of their body language.
Consent can be hard to navigate, but there are steps you can follow to make it easier.
When you like someone, you want to be together.
You find the time, the place, the space to meet and connect.
When you want to be with someone and they want to be with you.
That's when it helps to know the steps.
Check in with yourself. What do you want?
They're so hot, but I'm feeling very nervous. I wonder what they expect.
Am I happy to be here?
Check in with them. Find out how they're feeling.
Is this good?
It's a little bit fast for me.
Hear what they're saying.
Totally. We'll just do what we're both okay with.
Listening gives you a greater connection.
Saying what you need.
This is great. I'd like to do more.
And remember that you can always say no.
I'm not feeling comfortable. I want to stop.
Okay, I like to do more too. I get it. Let's stop.
Have respect for each other's decisions.
Notice their body language. Keep an eye out for what's not spoken.
I better check how they're doing. Is this okay?
Let's just go a bit slower.
Keep on talking and checking in, so that you're both on the same page.
When you know what you're consenting to,
Everyone has a better time.
Everyone feels heard.
Everyone feels respected.
The steps along the journey to consent
Keep us all safe and happy.
And they make it a whole lot more enjoyable too. Dublin Rape Crisis Centre runs the national 24-hour helpline for anyone affected by sexual violence at 1800 77 8888. For more information on the DRCC's work, check out drcc.ie.